Hey, tonight we're trading Hollywood castles for the real Middle Ages muddy lanes, smoky rooms, and a marriage contract you never signed. Think you could last a single dawn as a medieval wife? We're about to find out. If these after-hours history trips hit the spot, a quick like or subscribe keeps the stories flowing. I'm always curious where and when you're listening, so drop a comment with your city and the local time. Watching this little community light up the map never gets old. Good news, you're breathing in the year 1290. Bad news, the day already owns you body, name, and every hour until the church bell rings Compland. The hearth smoke stings your eyes, frost needles through the thatch, and somewhere a rooster crows late because you've been working longer than he has. Slip off your modern shoes, feel the dirt floor bite, and let's see why even sunrise might be more than most of us could survive. Wood smoke still clings to your hair from the kitchen fire, but tonight it mixes with something sharper, freshly scraped parchment, and the sour tang of spilled ale. The great hall is half lit, torches guttering, rafters groaning in a draught that hisses through the thatch. Somewhere above you a floorboard gives its familiar single creak, as if the whole house is sighing at what's about to happen. You're 14 years old enough, the canon lawyers say, to bind body and soul for life. Your name, once spoken freely in your father's yard, has spent the last month trapped in letters you cannot read. Charters, quit claims, and one short contract that reduces you to a line of ink between two men. 2 cows, a bolt of Flemish broadcloth, and the promise of peaceable blood if nobody draws steel at the wedding feast. That is the arithmetic of your future. Alice de Bellaby, a Yorkshire girl traded for a millstone and the same sort of promises in 1284, would understand. You'd trade stories if either of you were allowed within 10 yards of the negotiations. They came to terms over ale thick enough to chew. Your father, cheeks red, slapped the table, and your husband, to be a man twice your age, boots still caked with the road, nodded. No one asked which face you would rather see across a winter hearth, or whether you liked the way his left eye droops when he laughs. Choice belongs to men who own land. Consent is something the priest supplies in Latin. Outside, the village bell tolls none. You stand in a side room that smells of tallow and nervous sweat, while your mother fusses with your only linen shift, tugging the shoulders so the stains don't show. She offers advice in a spill of whispers. Bow your head during the blessing, keep your voice low, never contradict a husband in company. That last one sticks in your ribs. Smoke? Always smoke, the recurring scent of your life sneaks through a cracked shutter. In it you catch the tang of roasted beef from the feast you won't taste until the men decide they're hungry enough to notice you again. A breeze rattles the latch, and the plank beneath your bare feet answers with a grudging creak. You imagine the board is warning you, step carefully, splinters here are the least of your worries. The steward raps twice and ushers you into the hall. Everything feels too bright, though the torches sputter. Your groom stands near the hearth, boots planted like stakes, a leather belt heavy with knife and purse. His gaze slips over you as if assessing livestock-sound teeth. Workable hips, no obvious defects. Good news, at least he doesn't smell of drink tonight. Bad news, he smells of impatience. The priest lifts his hand, even the fire seems to hush. He recites in nomine patris. You mouth the vowels, prayer by echo. Under Gratian's decretum, a marriage is sealed by consent at the altar and consummation afterward. The law reserves you no appeal once both boxes are ticked. Your groom answers volo before the priest reaches the question mark. When the Latin turns toward you, your mother's fingers press the small of your back. You manage a whisper volo, and the priest nods as if you've spoken a whole paragraph. They bind your hands with a strip of wool and sprinkle holy water that smells faintly of stagnant pond. A cheer erupts. Someone slaps your groom's shoulder hard enough to jostle you both. Just like that, Verena sub virum, the woman under the man, your body is now his acreage, to till or burn as he sees fit. Your dowry moves from one ledger to another, and your legal voice folds into his like parchment under wax. The feast that follows is loud, blurred, and endlessly smoky. You spend most of it on a bench near the wall, chewing the inside of your cheek while men trade harvest gossip and wagers about next spring's tourney. Everyone repeats that you are lucky. Lucky he isn't twice your age. Lucky he has more than one field. Lucky his first wife died in childbirth and not of plague, so the house is considered clean. Luck, you decide, has a cruel sense of humour. Halfway through the evening your new husband calls for music. A fiddler scrapes out a reel, dancers whirl. You feel the floorboards vibrate first under their boots, then beneath your skin. The wooden skeleton of the hall complains with every stomp, and the rhythm merges with a creak you've heard since childhood, the one plank that always answers the wind. Tonight it keeps time with your pulse. Between songs your husband turns to you. "Smile," he murmurs, teeth shining in torchlight. His breath is wine and something deeper, a hunger you recognize from stories whispered after dark. You obey or try to. The smile feels stiff, the way linen freezes when left too long in winter sun. He nods, satisfied, then lifts a cup so large it hides your face from him entirely. At last the steward announces bedding. The hall erupts again, half with cheers, half with jokes that split your cheeks to burning. Women you've never met tug you toward the solar. They strip away your shift, stifling laughs at the bruises on your knees from kneeling through the nuptial mass. Someone slips a ribbon into your hair. Someone else drapes you in a thin wool blanket that smells of lavender and old sorrow. The smoke motif returns, thicker up here where the chimney throat narrows. You taste ash with each breath. The bed frame is oak, the mattress straw. You notice both before you notice the door closing. Then it is only you and him, and the smoke and the floorboard that groans louder in this smaller chamber, as if announcing witnesses have left. He sits beside you, boots off but knife still at his belt. "It won't hurt long," he offers. A kindness if you ignore the way his eyes measure distance. Good news, the midwife showed you raspberry leaf tea for cramps. Bad news, no herb sweetens what is about to happen. He reaches to untie the blanket. Your heart counts seconds like grains through an hourglass. Somewhere in the courtyard a rooster crows drunk on torchlight. Wrong hour entirely. You almost laugh. The floorboard creaks again, louder, closer, like a pulse beneath the timber. And that's before your husband even learns your face. Wood smoke nips at your nostrils before the rooster has even cleared his throat. The hearth's overnight embers have collapsed into a sulky red bruise, leaving the cottage colder than the moonlit yard outside. You roll away from your husband's broad back and plant your feet on a dirt floor that crackles with frost. The plank beneath the bed gives its one familiar creak, a wooden sigh, half warning, half welcome. No sunrise yet, but the day already owns you. Your first thought is bread, because bread is survival. Yesterday's loaf is a stone. Today's must rise, or someone in this house will not. You shuffle to the quernstone a pair of granite discs that weigh more than you did at age 10. Numb fingers tip a scoop of rye into the eye and you start the grind. Around, stone squealing, wrists popping until flour drifts like winter dust across the tabletop. A decent miller would spare you this drudgery, but you can't pay a miller's toll. Besides, the reeve inspects ground grain at market and fines women who steal the Lord's portion. You know the story of Agnes Miller from Shropshire stuck 3 days in the stocks for short weight. Her children jeered for every rat-tailed loaf. That won't be your fate. You turn the stone until your shoulders burn and the flour looks like grey snow against the lantern glow. Fire next. You rake coals, blow gently, add straw, whisper a prayer to St. Brigid, patroness of hearths. The tinder flares, smoke snakes upward, meeting rafters black with decades of soot. Every breath tastes of yesterday's ash and something older, as if the cottage itself is exhaling its history. You set the dough to prove beneath a scrap of linen and hurry outside with empty buckets. The well is a 1/4 mile. Running water means you are the one running. Rope bites your palms as you raise the first sloshing bucket. Cold seeps upward through the wood until your elbows ache. 2 buckets balanced on a yoke across your shoulders, you trudge back, mindful of the assize of bread and ale passed a generation ago. Water fouled with clay earns a penny fine, and pennies are scarce. The oak digs a red groove above your collarbones, but you keep a steady pace, counting steps to distract from the sting. 48, 49. A crow heckles from the thatch. You hiss back because you're too busy to be mocked this early. Inside again, you knead the risen dough with brisk turns of wrist and heel of hand. The bread will bake while you wrestle the morning stew barley, leeks, a suspicious scrap of salt pork into a pot. The cottage smells briefly of hope, an illusion wiped away when your husband finally stirs, scratching and yawning like a bear in spring. Ale, he grumbles. You pour what's left from last night, thick enough to chew, and he drinks without thanks. Chores unroll like a scroll you've read too many times. Mend the hem of his tunic where briars ripped it during yesterday's hunt. Patch the roof above the crib before snow finds the crack. Check the thatching pins, one loose peg could invite wind and winter straight into the cradle. Your fingers snap a frozen reed and you curse softly. The reed replies with a brittle crack and drops away. Wood smoke curls back through the doorway, stinging eyes that already smart from cold. By mid-morning you've fed chickens, coaxed a reluctant cow into giving milk, and skimmed the first cream. You hum an old ballad, nothing romantic, just a tune that keeps rhythm with work. The baby wakes, wriggling beneath wool that smells of lanolin and last week's fever. You nurse him on one arm while stirring pottage with the other, foot rocking the cradle in a practiced sway. Maternal multitasking, 1290 edition. A thud at the doorway announces the reeve, cloaked in sheepskin and authority. He eyes the bread cooling on the shelf, weighs it in his palm like a purse. You hold your breath. Too light and fines follow, too heavy and you've wasted grain. He grunts approval, small mercy, and demands 3 fresh eggs as rent for the Lord's oven you didn't use. You pay without protest, arguing adds pennies to penalties. The plank under the reeve's boot gives its accusing creak and he's gone. Back to the fire. You ladle stew into a wooden trencher for your husband, who gulps it and leaves to sling a net in the river. Freedom? Not quite. Now the female portion begins, spinning wool until lanolin coats your skin, weaving on a warp-weighted loom whose stones bruise your ankles when it sways, scrubbing the last harvest of root vegetables so they won't rot before Candlemas. You slip wool cards from a shelf and remember Margaret of Louth, recorded in the manor rolls of 1313. She went into labour while turning a spit, cut the cord herself with a bread knife, and kept turning so supper wouldn't burn. A heroic tale whispered at Wells, yet it ends with a penny fine for bloodying the flagstones. You wonder whether the fine hurt more than the childbirth. Late morning brings the village bell for prime. You pause, wipe flour from your forehead, murmur the paternoster you half believe. Smoke drifts upward again. A splinter pops in the fire, sending sparks toward the rushes. 2 quick stomps, crisis averted. Heart still racing, you open the shutter for air and frost bursts through like a thief, biting your knuckles where chilblains already bloom. Time to haul water again. Second trip, same ache. This time a neighbour meets you on the road, a widow wrapped in patched rabbit fur. She presses a pouch of dried raspberry leaf into your hand, for when the pains start again, she whispers, eyes on your belly that isn't yet swollen but soon will be. You thank her. Tuck the herbs into your bodice, and pray you won't need them for months. Odds say otherwise. The average medieval wife spends one of every 3 years pregnant. Doesn't matter if harvest failed, or a fever drained the parish, or the midwife buried another infant yesterday. The law calls you Verena sub virum, woman under man, and the bishop calls children God's gift, even when God forgets to send enough grain. Buckets down, hands numb, back inside. You push dough scraps into a clay bowl, pour whey over them, and set the mixture by the fire for tomorrow's pig feed. Everything saved, nothing wasted. Thrift is the armour of the poor. A mouse skitters across the rafters. You clap sharply, and the plank above your head offers its creak in solidarity. Noon approaches. Husband returns with 2 perch still twitching. Good news, protein tonight. Bad news, he smells river wet and impatient. While you gut fish, he recounts gossip from the alehouse, rumours of a tithe collector riding soon, talk of a distant war that might raise wool prices. He wants another child if wools fetch good coin. You nod, because nodding is easier than explaining your womb feels like a battlefield already. Afternoon light slants through the door, illuminating dust motes that swirl like tiny spirits above the floor. You sweep them with a birch broom, each stroke stirring that persistent smoke and ash perfume. Then to the garden plot to claw at frozen soil, checking over wintering turnips for rot. Your fingertips go purple. You flex them against the cold handle of a mattock. In the distance, church bells mark nones. You whisper a quick have and dig faster. By late afternoon, bread must cool, stew must thicken, children must be corralled. You plop the toddler on a three-legged stool and comb knots from her hair, with fingers slicked in tallow. She whines. You hush her with a rhyme about St. Bridget's cloak covering hungry lambs. It almost works. Dusk creeps in. Smoke thickens as the damper sticks. You crack the shutter again, and frost snakes along the sill. Your husband sharpens a knife on a whetstone, testing the edge on his thumb. A thin red bead appears and he laughs. You hand him a strip of linen to wrap it. Blood on the table invites flies, even in winter. Supper, barley stew ladled into a shared bowl, crust of bread for each, river fish browned on a spit. The baby fusses. You rock him while swallowing mouthfuls of lukewarm broth. You dare not complain about taste. Famine sits only one bad harvest away. You remember stories of the Great Hunger 60 years past. Corpses buried with mouths stained green from nettles. You shiver, and not from cold. Night tasks remain. You patch a roof leak with daub mixed from clay and straw. Candlelight flickers, throwing monster shadows that sway with your trowel. You set snares near the grain bin for rats, whispering St. Gertrude's name for protection. Finally you bank the hearth, spreading ashes to keep coals alive till morning. Wood smoke lingers like a lullaby you didn't ask for. The children sleep on straw mattresses near the fire. Your husband snores on the bench, ale, jug half empty at his feet. You sit a moment on the threshold, knitting wool you carded at dawn 12 tight stitches before your eyes cross. Outside, the moon hangs thin as a sickle. Inside, the plank offers one last weary creak. Then silence. Too much silence. Even the rooster mutters in his dream. You hold your breath. The chickens in the coop rustle, then fall abruptly still, as if some unseen hand has closed around the night itself. And that's before the thatch begins to move. Wood smoke still threads your hair from last night's fire, but the April air already tastes of damp soil and snowmelt. Your husband is outside counting lambs. He doesn't notice when you lean over the hedge and retch so hard your eyes burn. You wipe your mouth, mutter that the pottage turned and pray no one saw. The truth sits lower, that bloom of soreness and slick warmth you've come to recognize as the body's quiet arithmetic. Good news, the midwife Ellen lives 2 cottages west and owes you for mending her apron. Bad news, she's already tending 3 bellies this season, and the rye in every field looks thin. Thin harvests make thin mothers make bad births. You carry on because bread won't knead itself. The quernstone squeals, wrists pop, flour drifts across the table like candle ash. Your mother-in-law clicks her tongue each time you pause to breathe, so you grind faster, just to prove you can. She hands you a sprig of rue to settle the stomach. Everyone knows too much rue can settle more than that, but refusing a mother-in-law's herb is how gossip begins. You boil it, drink without blinking, and feel wood smoke scratch deeper in your chest. Weeks pass. By the feast of Corpus Christi, your belly rounds enough that the quern buckle pinches. You slip it a notch looser and grind on. Agnes of Shropshire got 3 days in the stocks for underweight loaves. You will not be her echo. Ellen inspects you by candlelight, presses 2 fingers to the inside of your wrist, counts heartbeats the way a reeve counts hens. She slides an English silver penny, edges worn smooth, into your palm. Sew this against your belly. It calms the womb. You stitch it into linen and feel absurdly wealthy, even as soot stains its face overnight. Summer fairs arrive with mud, music, and hawthorn blossom. Your dress no longer laces, so you trade 2 eggs and a twist of nettle thread for a second-hand kirtle that smells of another woman's sweat. A tooth-gapped widow taps your stomach and says, "Pray for a girl, the king needs weavers." You laugh politely and buy nothing else. That evening, minstrels gather outside the alehouse and sing St. Margaret, bursting from the dragon's gut patroness of childbirth. Each refrain thumps through the floorboard at home until you mistake the creak for music. Harvest comes. You haul water with a yoke that carves a red groove over bone. Bend, stack, bend again. Goose fat covers a blister where the strap cut through skin. Your neighbour Mary Cobb screams through her first birth one dawn. The baby arrives feet first. Ellen calls for hot wine and twine. The parish clerk comes to witness. By noon Mary is silent. Clerk scratching that the mother expired, but the child breathes. They carry her past your doorway, wrapped in her own bed linen. The smoke drifting from your hearth smells like somebody else's mourning cloak. You drink raspberry leaf infusion until your tongue numbs. In September your husband returns from market with a splinter of wood, allegedly St. Joseph's bench. Pine tar, not Palestine, but you tie it round your neck. He counts coins and jokes about a dowry cow for a second blanket. You smile, because disagreement costs more than linen. Michaelmas frost needles through the shutter before dawn. A crow heckles. The floorboard answers with its weary groan. You bank the fire, then freeze when a stab of pain folds you like parchment. Not yet. Ellen said, St. Luke's Day at the earliest. You shuffle, breathe, and the pain passes for now. St. Lucy's Eve brings labour like a knife through the spine. Ellen arrives with candles, relic parcel, quiet commands, boil water, barmen outside. She smells of marigold and mutton fat. Your mother-in-law prays a Latin verse you half believe. Hours drip. You vomit rue and bile. Someone empties the pail into the hearth and a sour steam joins the smoke. Ellen checks dilation, nods once, grips your hand. You push. Something tears cloth? Flesh? You can't tell. Another push, another tearing, and wood smoke is the only thing you see. A will not yours cuts through the haze. A daughter, purple fading to red. Good news, you breathe. Bad news, you can't feel your legs. Ellen kneads your belly, slides the afterbirth into linen for burial beneath the elder tree because, planted right, it keeps witches off. You believe her. Belief weighs less than doubt. They wrap the child in the last scrap of blanket you surrendered for tithe. The floorboard gives a single, long groan its verdict on your work and falls silent. 40 days of lying in follow. The mid-January sun crawls across the wall while you nurse and stitch tears in your own flesh. Father Aldhelm pours holy water on your hair and declares you clean. The droplets feel colder than any frost. Your husband says a second child would earn another field lease if wool prices rise. You nod because nodding is easier than telling him your womb feels like a battlefield. Spring mud invades the cottage. The baby coughs a dry little bark. Ellen mixes goat grease with thyme and says the herb moon is coming, your course is with it. You almost laugh. A messenger rides through announcing Edward Longshanks's new tallage widow's fines first, children second, wives last. The baby coughs again, sharper. Smoke curls over her cradle like a tiny aerial shroud. You stir the hearth. Watch sparks climb the chimney throat. Feel the ache building under your ribs the way thunderheads build behind hills. You realize the coin stitched to your belly band has slid lower. Tugged by weight you hadn't dared confirm. A quiver of dread and expectancy flickers together like smoke and draught meeting in the flue. The baby wheezes. You lift her, feel her ribcage flutter. Outside, the henhouse goes suddenly silent. You strain to listen. Floorboard, breath, distant rooster, then nothing. And that's before anyone notices your monthly bleeding never returned at all. Wood smoke clings to your cloak as you step beyond the cottage gate. The familiar rasp of the floorboard behind you giving its single farewell groan. Dawn is no more than a bruised ribbon on the horizon, yet market day waits for no wife who values her place in the Reeves ledger. 2 baskets dangle from a yoke across your shoulders, one with 6 eggs, one with a knot of nettle thread, and both already feel heavier than their worth. The lane is mud to the ankles. Lambs bawl in a neighbouring pen, sounding almost surprised to be alive in a century this cold. Each breath tastes of wet wool and chimney ash. Frost feathers the hedges. Your toes prickle in thin leather shoes patched more times than you can count. But needs must. The household salt is low. The baby's shift needs new ribbon. And your husband expects ale ingredients whether or not last season's barley is truly paid for. You pass the manor bake oven, where smoke rolls from the vent like a dark herald. The scent follows you down the rutted road as if trying to hitch a ride to town. 1/2 mile on, the forest thins and the causeway widens. Caravan carts rumble past iron-shod wheels spitting cold mud. A tinker offers to mend your kettle for a penny. Tempting, but pennies migrate faster than geese. You shake your head and feel the yoke bite. A crow laughs overhead, then flaps toward the village spire that knifes the pale sky. By sunrise proper you crest the last ridge, and St. Olaf's market sprawls before you. Tents in mad colours, pens of geese arguing over spilled grain, cook fires puffing so much smoke it could be a siege. Hawthorn blossom and pig dung duel in the wind, neither quite wins. An old crone thrusts a sprig of rosemary under your nose. Keeps the pox away, love. You smile, tuck the herb in your bodice, and breathe easier, even though you know the pox laughs at plants. First stop the salt merchant. His scales are brass, but his heart is tin. He pinches the crystals into the balance with a miser's caress. You trade 4 eggs, trying not to think about tomorrow's breakfast. Salt in your pouch, you head for the cloth stalls where Flemish weavers tout ribbon dyed with woad so blue it seems unholy. A thumb-width strip costs 2 farthings daylight robbery, but your girl's christening dress feels naked without it. You haggle, the merchant's eyes flick to your worn kirtle and smirk. In the end you surrender 1 farthing and half the nettle thread. Fair? Never. But a mother's pride bends coin like soft lead. Wind shifts. Wood smoke again, laced now with cloves from a spit-roasted capon turning above a brazier. The smell makes your stomach cramp with longing. You chew the inside of your cheek and push on. At the well you pause to draw water. A leper rings his warning bell beside the rope. His face is a map of old battles with God. You drop a crumb of bread into his bowl and cross yourself. The floorboard's sound echoes in memory creak, as if reminding you there's charity and then there's ruin. A juggler performs near the ale tents, tossing knives that catch the sun, each spin whispering risk. Children shriek with delight. You should move. The sun climbs and the reeve begins his rounds before sext. But a flash of crimson silk in a nearby booth snares your gaze. A kerchief fine enough to break hearts. Sumptuary law of 1261 says linen for wives of your station. Nothing finer. No silk, no scarlet dye. Yet the colour glows like something promised in dreams. Your hand lifts before your mind agrees. The merchant grins, teeth like cracked slate. 3 pence, good wife, and you'll shame every lady at mass. You laugh as though 3 pence isn't more than a month of egg money and turn away. But the silk flames in your thoughts even after the booth vanishes behind other stalls. A bell clangs near the pillory. Mid-market proclamation. The sheriff reading new fines for cloth too gaudy, shoes too long, hat feathers too tall. Sumptuary trouble season has opened. You adjust your cloak, suddenly conscious of every frayed thread. Before the worry sticks, a rush of hooves parts the crowd. The Baron's steward rides through, seeking fresh trout for tonight's board. Folk bow. You drop a knee, and the mud finds its favourite crease in your skirt. When you stand, your right basket feels lighter. Panic stabs eggs gone? You twist around. A boy with fox-quick fingers darts through bodies, your last 2 eggs peeking from his pocket. You shout, he vanishes like smoke in a draught. 1 breakfast poorer again. Heart thumping, you grip the remaining basket so tight the wicker squeals. Somewhere behind the spice stall, a 1-string rebec starts a melancholy tune. The note slithers through your ribs. You breathe deep. Smoke in, nerves out. A brewer's wife waves you over to taste small ale. You swallow a mouthful warm, nutty, thin as honesty. She winks. Brew's good, but stories ferment better. Tell yours? You smile but decline. Stories cost nothing to give, yet everything to spend. As the sun tilts toward noon, you realize hunger has sharpened into pain. You trade the last egg for a heel of rye and a smear of goose fat. The bread steams in the chill air. You close your eyes on the first bite, wood smoke ghosting across your tongue like seasoning. Halfway through the loaf, you remember the mid-video covenant with the invisible audience who keeps your nights filled with candlelight and these strange visits across centuries. You swallow, wipe crumbs, and speak under your breath. If you're still wandering with me through mud and music, drop hail and ale in the comments so I know you haven't lost your purse or your courage in the crowd. A market cry for a world beyond the market. Odd magic, but you trust it. Back to business. You queue at the toll desk, ready to pay the market penny before the reeve can cite you for unlawful trade. Ahead, a widow pleads that her cheese weighs honest measure. The clerk finds it scant by a hair's breadth and exacts a fine double the value. The widow's shoulders fold like wet parchment. You step forward, pulse loud. The clerk weighs your salt pouch, sniffs, enters a mark. He eyes your ribbon bundle next, just dull woad. Safely legal, but his gaze slides to your cloak pin, a tiny copper brooch shaped like a lily. Copper is permitted. Lilies, however, indicate courtly affection, a symbol frowned upon for wives beneath gentle rank. You didn't know that when your husband gifted it last Lammas. The clerk's lips purse. 2 pence for unauthorized device. Blood drains from your face. 2 pence more than you own after today's trades. Kind sir, you begin, voice thin, but his quill already scratches the parchment. Good news? You're not fined for the imaginary silk. Bad news? You're on the brink of debt for a flower smaller than a farthing. The reeve appears as if summoned by despair. Tall wool cloak lined in squirrel fur, a luxury he finds others for owning. He recognizes you. Last winter you bartered chickens for leniency on oven dues. His smile is all wolf. Issue, mistress, he asks, though he heard every word. Smoke coils from a nearby fish grill burning your eyes. You explain, hands trembling like reeds. He listens, nods, and extends a palm. 2 pence or collateral. Collateral means the ribbon for your daughter, or worse. Floorboard memory, creak chews vast. Before your tongue decides, a sudden gust lifts the canvas above the cloth stalls. Sunlight floods scarlet silk, igniting it like fire. The crowd gasps, tents ripple, prices waver on lips. The reeve's head turns toward the commotion. You feel the heartbeat of a chance. And that's when he clamps a heavy hand around your sleeve. Wood smoke hugs the rafters of the manor hall, turning the torchlight the colour of weak tea. You stand in the shadows, skirts still damp from walking the mile of rutted lane that separates your cottage from your lord's justice. The floor underfoot isn't dirt today, but oak planks wide as coffin lids, planed smooth enough that your shoes slip if you breathe too fast. One of those planks creaks each time the reeve shifts his weight, as though the timber itself objects to the proceedings. You note the sound creak like a heartbeat you can't escape. Your summons arrived at dawn, a square of parchment, charcoal scrawl, seal still tacky. The words were short, appear, manor court, trespass, but the implications long. You spent the walk rehearsing every honest detail, the piglet, the turnips, the broken hedge. Honesty may not save you, it simply shortens the inquest. Manor court happens every 3 weeks, rain or revolt. It's the lowest rung of English justice, yet to you it feels like God's own throne. The steward sits at a trestle table flanked by 4 jurors chosen from free tenants. Behind them stands the reeve, cloak reeking of wet wool and authority. On the bench to your right, the Hayward twirls a hazel rod symbol of his power to fine anyone who lets livestock roam. He's the reason you're here. Good news, Manor Court rarely orders hanging. Bad news, it happily orders everything short of it fines, stocks, penance, forfeiture, even the ducking stool if rumour runs hot. You keep your gaze fixed on the barley straw littering the floor, trying to steady your breath. The bailiff calls the docket in Norman French first, then in accented English for the benefit of tenants who never learned courtly tongues. Case 1, Robert Atwell, absent from Boone work, fine, 1 penny. Case 2, Matilda Le Smith, brewing weak ale, fine, 8 pence and ale poured out before witnesses. Smoke stings your throat. The creaking plank keeps time like a drum leading you to the scaffold. Your name is next. Isabel, wife of Thomas Carter. You step forward, knees loosening, palms cold. The steward doesn't ask if you can speak. Wives rarely do. He reads aloud the charge. For trespass. did remove one piglet belonging to the Lord's fields, causing damage to hedges and young turnip shoots. The Hayward nods, satisfied. Facts first. Yesterday's dawn, your piglet wriggled through a broken wattle panel and into the domain turnip patch. You chased it, caught it, mended the hole with a sod of clay. Damage? 4 shoots bitten, perhaps 6. The real sin is that the Lord's vegetables suffered at a cotter's animal mouth. You open your lips, mercy my lord, but stop. The steward isn't your lord. He is a hired pen and parchment, detached as winter. Instead, you speak to the jury, men who sweat in fields like you, though better shod. The hedge was cracked before, you begin, voice too soft. You clear it. I patched it at once, sir. Smoke from my hearth you may still smell on my kirtle. I left baking to come here. Silence. A drop of tallow hisses in a torch. The steward scribbles, blows on ink, asks the Hayward to attest. Hayward clears his throat. I saw the animal beyond the hedge. Shoots were nipped, soil uprooted, damage is certain. Whether the fault was woman's beast or her hedge, the same as saying rain or river flooded the lane both water. Laughter from 2 jurors, the kind that bruises without touch. You try again. The hedge splintered in last week's storm, I warned the reeve. You shouldn't have said that. The reeve's eyebrows rise, the creaking plank answers, a low, dangerous note. Smoke gutters. A downdraft sends a swirl across the steward's ledger. He cites leges henrisi primi. A tenant owes amends for damage if negligence is proven. Can any here attest the hedge was reported broken? No one speaks. Reporting things costs favours. No one lends one for free. The steward turns to the jury. Assessment. They huddle. Whisper behind cupped palms. You count heartbeats, wood smoke in, fear out. A spider silk of hope clings when John Miller, whose wife borrowed flax from you at Candlemas, glances your way. He knows your pantry, knows you've sold eggs just to salt pottage for the children. They face the steward. Verdict. Guilty of trespass. Fine. 1 penny for each damaged shoot. 6 pence. Plus compensation. Replace that section of a hedge with sound wattle before Michaelmas, or forfeit the piglet. 6 pence equals 3 days' rye, or 2 nights' good sleep without hunger gnawing. Your chest hollows. The steward adds, almost as afterthought, court costs 1 penny, dips his quill. 7 now. Good news, no stocks. Bad news. The reeve may seize your woven basket if you can't pay today. You swallow the ash in your throat. I have 3 pence, you say, voice small. The rest I'll bring at Lammas, along with fresh withies for the hedge. A pause. The steward lifts his eyes, a rare sunbreak through cloud. Half by Lammas, half by Michaelmas, he amends. Ink dries. Gavel, really just a stick, taps once. Case closed. Relief slips in like warmth under a blanket, then leaves. 7 pence by harvest means grinding more hours at the quern, selling cream that should nourish your own child, maybe parting with the only pewter spoon you received as a wedding token. Smoke stings worse. You linger, waiting for Clark's tally. The hall empties. Robert Atwell paying his penny, Matilda sobbing over wasted ale. John Miller pauses beside you. He whispers, I'll send a rod of willow stronger for hedge. Gratitude chokes you. You nod. Ledger sealed. Steward rises. Court done until 3 weeks hence. He beckons the reeve, hands over scrolls. You glimpse a future line on that parchment. If fines unpaid, seize chattel, levy distress. The ink seems to glow like fresh blood. Outside, drizzle spits. The manor gate yawns. Smoke from the hall follows you into grey daylight, clinging as though afraid of judgment too. Your shoes sink in mud. Each step pulls like debt. Halfway home you meet the parish beadle dragging a drunk towards stocks. The drunk is your neighbour's eldest, eyes red as embers. He mumbles about tithes and taxes. The beadle grins. Fines feed the church kitty as surely as sin feeds hell. You imagine yourself in those stocks, rain in your hair, children watching. Determination hardens. Before you reach the ford, you snap a fistful of willow shoots, testing their bend. You'll weave that hedge so tight sparrows will file petitions to enter. Evening finds you kneeling by the hearth, spreading coins on the board. 2 copper farthings, 3 pennies, a clipped halfpenny with the king's face rubbed blind. Your husband watches, jaw tight. "We'll pay," you tell him. "I'll spin nights." He pokes the fire, sparks jump, smoke curls, there it is again, the unbroken motif of your life painting, your resolve in soot. Later, while children snore, you slip outside. Moonlight rims the broken hedge. You work by feel, pushing hazel stakes, weaving willow, packing clay. Fingers numb, back screaming, but the gaps close. Somewhere an owl asks its sorrowful one-note question. You answer with silence, you have no breath to spare. Dawn paints the horizon red, a farmer's warning. You stretch, cracked nails catching on withies. The hedge stands like a stitched wound, ugly but closed. Smoke from your cottage chimney rises straight at first, then sighs sideways as wind shifts. You often wondered how justice tastes. Now you know, like ashes washed down with cold resolve. You shoulder the piglet recaptured, squealing, and set it inside a pen doubled in height. The floorboard by the hearth creaks as you pass. You touch it with your foot, half expecting it to speak the jury's tally. Lammas is weeks away. 7 pence looms like a thundercloud. You plan, eggs on market day, extra weft on the loom, a jar of honey if the bees oblige. Honey fetches good coin, unless bears find it first. Good news. Bears haven't prowled these woods since King John. Bad news? The sheriff does, and his appetite is keener. Twilight again. You grind rye, each turn of the quern a prayer and a curse. The piglet sleeps against the fence, ignorant of economics. Smoke drifts, floor creaks, and for a breath your world holds steady. Then hoofbeats hammer the lane, a shout, "Summons!" Another parchment thrust at your husband's hand. You wipe flour on your apron, heart stuttering. This parchment bears the sheriff's seal, not the steward's. And that's before anyone reads aloud the new charge. Prime Bell shakes the cobwebs off the village before the sky even thinks of turning grey. You're already outside, skirts clipped up with a wooden pin, breath clouding like pipe smoke while you hoe the last of yesterday's frost from the barley rows. Each swing of the blade thumps through half-frozen soil and rattles up your arms. Good news, the ground isn't stone yet. You can still pry weeds before they knit themselves into a green snare. Bad news, your fingers burn so fiercely you keep checking to be sure they're still there. A rooster crows behind schedule lazy thing, and the manor's shutters creak as someone richer than you finally decides the day has started. You wipe your nose on a sleeve and move to the next row. The air is raw, metallic, tinged with the faint tang of last night's hearth fires drifting from a dozen chimneys. Not that ash and ember perfume you've grown used to, today it's thinner, as though even the smoke is conserving energy. The church bell tolls again, tierce. Time to shift from field to spinning. You duck into the cottage, toes numb, and scoop raw wool from a wicker basket. It's still tacky with lanolin. The smell is half sheep, half rain-damp fleece. You seat yourself on a 3-legged stool, stretch a wad of fibres, and set the spindle twirling. Wool hisses through calloused fingers as the twist climbs the strand. Turn, inhale, draft, exhale rhythm as steady as a chant. Inside, 2 toddlers chase the same stick around the dirt floor, laughing until one trips and splits a lip. You press a scrap of linen to the cut and murmur a rhyme St. Bridget is said to like. Blood stops. You hand them a lump of yesterday's bread to quiet the storm and return to the spindle. Twist, wind, twist. The hearth is cold, no time to relight it yet. The husband stomps in, half awake, wanting ale. You pour him a cup so thick it moves more like soup. He drinks, wipes foam with the back of his hand, and grunts something about repairing the ploughshare. When he asks if dinner might involve pork, you don't bother reminding him the pig went to taxes last Lammas. He'll remember when hunger starts chewing his belly again. The bell for sex drifts across the fields. Time for mass. You herd the children outside, tug your wool cloak tight, and tread the rutted lane to the stone church that squats like an old toad at the village edge. Inside, candles gutter. The smell is beeswax, damp stone, and a waft of incense meant to disguise a century of mildew. You kneel on rough boards still sprinkled with yesterday's straw and listen to Father Engelbert recite the Credo in Latin you barely grasp. He preaches on Eve and the sorrow of women. You nod at the right places. Dissent is expensive. A line catches in your ribs. Labour is holy if borne without complaint. You swallow that thought like vinegar and let the children drowse against your shoulder. After the final blessing you hurry home. Midday sun peers through cloud, weak but present. You stoke the hearth with last month's birch and set a cauldron over the new flames, the iron ring groaning under its weight. A handful of barley, carrots soft as old cork, a knuckle of salt pork no bigger than your thumb drop stir, pray it thickens. Smoke eddies up, stings your eyes, and slips through the thatch in thin blue threads. While the stew grumbles, you haul water again. The well is busy. 3 women already there gossip under their breath. One boasts her cousin's cousin knew a midwife who saved a breech birth with just garlic and a prayer. The second answers that the Lord's Reeve fined a widow 3 shillings for gleaning after sunset. You nod, haul 2 buckets, and keep silent. Stories are weight, and you're carrying enough. Back home you spread a fraying cloth on the lone table. Husband returns with a cracked nail and a cracked temper, but the smell of stew softens him. Bowls are ladled more liquid than anything, and bread crusts float like tired ships. You mutter, grace. The youngest steals your chunk when you look away. You let her have it. No rest. Bread for tomorrow must rise, so you lift the quernstone onto its peg. It squeals like a rusty hinge with every turn. Grain dust coats your sleeves, mixes with sweat, forms thin paste on skin. By the time the dough is tucked near the hearth, you've coughed enough flour to whitewash your throat. None of this stops the church's afternoon bell nones. Work pauses for another prayer, this time spoken while you mend a tear in your husband's hose. Needle in, needle out. Amen. The children practice letters on a slate. Pax, Deus, Mater. You correct a crooked A and wish your own mother had learned more than counting hens. Sun sinks. Chores pivot outdoors again. You split kindling, skin tingling where cold and sweat duel for territory. Geese honk across the sky. The dog barks at shadows that never finish forming. You gather any herbs still alive, sage, yarrow tie them with reed, hang them in the smoke path to dry. Winter is greedy. You must be greedier. Vesper's bell rings. You bow your head where you stand, offer a tired Psalm 88, the one that groans. My soul is full of troubles. Clouds bruise purple overhead. Husband sharpens a sickle by torchlight, sparks flitting like brief fireflies. Children chase echoes until the dark herds them inside. Supper is simply more stew, thicker now. You fish out the pork knuckle and slice 6 slivers, 1 for each, pretending not to count who gets the largest. The hearth pops. A spark lands on your hem. You stamp it out before it licks higher, another hole to mend tomorrow. Compline approaches. You wipe bowls with yesterday's rushes, bank the fire beneath an ash blanket, and lead the family in the paternoster. The cottage dims to a single tallow dip. Flame wavering. Husband dozes on the bench, you take out the spindle again. Wool runs through fingers till your eyes blur. Somewhere in the stillness, the floorboard, the one under the loft ladder, gives a slow, deliberate groan. You freeze. Spindle silenced. It creaks again, sharper this time, as if announcing an unseen weight coming down. And that's before you notice the latch lifting, though no hand is on the door. Rain has dragged its iron nails across the sky for 8 weeks straight, drumming patience out of every roof in the village. The barley never ripened. The oats sprouted on the stalk and rotted where they stood. By late October the ground is an endless slurry that can't even swallow footprints. Each step lifts a glistening cake of clay, then slaps it back again. You pick your way across the yard at dawn, skirts hitched almost to the knee, shoes long since abandoned for scraps of wool bound around your feet. Good news, you still have feet. Bad news, they haven't been dry since Lammas. Inside, wood smoke hovers so low it seems to have weight. You cough, wave it aside, and listen for the familiar floorboard groan. There it is slow, reluctant as though the timber worries what the season will demand next. The hearth burns peat now, firewood is too precious. Every thrust of the poker releases a waft of bog rot that masks the scent of stew, and that might be a blessing. What simmers in the pot is mostly water, thickened with cabbage ribs and the marrow of a bone you've boiled 4 times already. Salt is gone, seasoning comes from wood smoke and hope. Field tallies are grim arithmetic everyone knows but no one says aloud. A peck of wheat that cost 3 pence last year jumped past 12 before the harvest even failed. The Lord's tithe is still 1 sheaf in 10. The church refuses to budge on its 1 in 12. You watch the reeve measure empty barns with a yardstick, his face apologetic in a way that made everything worse. God sends the weather, he said. You almost answered, yes, and men set the rents, but you bit your tongue until you tasted copper, because speaking truth in a famine is like lighting tinder in a thatched loft. Outside, the village well mirrors a pewter sky. You haul 2 buckets, each descent of the rope echoing across the green like a funeral bell. Brother Oldhelm preached last Sunday about the chastening of Sodom, that God withholds rain from the wicked. Someone near the back muttered that here he's punished them with too much. The mutterer was your husband, and you pinched his arm hard enough to bruise because the bishop's proctor was visiting from Lincoln and wears a fence the way other men wear cloaks. Fines don't drop when harvests do. Back home you knead a dough nobody wants to call bread. Flour is half-ground acorns, half-coarse rye salvaged from the miller's sweepings. The miller still takes his toll. He weighs it with rocks when no one is looking. You add nettle seed for bulk, sour it with last year's barley leaven, and pray the loaf rises enough to fake generosity. Overwork stiffens the mass to a lump the colour of storm clouds. When you score a cross on top not for beauty but to let the devil out, the dough cracks like old leather. Midday, the tax riders arrive. 3 men in Lincoln green, dripping water off the edges of their hoods, demanding tallage arrears Edward I decreed 5 years back, but only now cares to collect. They smell of wet wool and horse sweat. You smell like smoke and boiled weeds. The senior rider recites an inventory. 2 hens, 1 cock, 1 half share in a pig. You argue the pig was slaughtered at Michaelmas because it kept wasting. He nods, adjusts his quill, then writes, Pig, salted value unchanged. Your husband squeezes your wrist to silence. Angry words cost more than hens. When the riders leave, they take 1 chicken and the half-rotten salt pork. They sear the bird's feet on your own hearth to prove ownership and make you watch the blackening skin. The floorboard groans like someone inside the wood would rather not be here either. Afternoon falls early this time of year. You trudge to the fields with the gleaning basket even though stubble is ankle-deep in muck. Canon law says the poor may gather what the sickle missed. The bailiff says the law bends when barns are empty. You glean anyway, clawing through sludge for kernels that look like mouse droppings. Beside you works Alice Withers, widowed at Candlemas. Her hand shakes so badly she spills half her grains. You give her your cloth scrap to knot round her wrist. She thanks you with a story. Monks at St. Albans mixed ground peas into their bread and called it Lenten fare. 3 brothers died of it last week. You wonder if peas killed them or hunger did. Night chores shrink when there's nothing left to ration. You ladle the stew 4 bowls, 1 for each child, none for you, then tilt the pot to drink the grease-slick water at the bottom. It scalds your tongue but leaves the taste of iron nails. The children chew in silence. Chewing takes imagination they no longer have. After supper your husband lifts the last sack of seed grain, gauges its weight, sets it down without comment. A look passes between you that contains all the vacant fields of Christendom. If you plant, you starve now. If you eat, you starve next year. The floorboard creaks once sharply, as though it has chosen between futures. Long after everyone sleeps, you push a shutter open. Cloudbreak reveals a moon so thin it's mostly longing. Somewhere else, you think. Wheat ripens in dry wind. Bread cools on oak boards. Mothers scold children for stealing crusts instead of pray they'll choke them down. You lean into the smoke-sour air and let drizzle prick your cheeks until you can pretend the wet is only weather. Toward midnight the dog whimpers. He's dreaming of fuller bowls. You stroke his ribs. each one counting months of scarcity. He licks your wrist, tasting nettle and soot. You whisper St. Bega's charm against famine, field grant grain, womb grant life, hearth grant heat. The words fall into the smoke and disappear like sparks up a chimney flue. Morning's first bell would ring prime, but the bell rope snapped from damp and no one has hemp to spare. Instead, the village wakes to the noise of crows wheeling over the granary roof. Grain dust drifted through the eaves in the night. The birds smelled it the way sinners smell pardon. You run with the others, waving sticks, shouting, but the crows dart and circle, cackling like black-clad reeves. Someone hurls a rock. A bird falls and thrashes in the mire. Children pounce, wring its neck, cheer as if they've caught a goose. You watch the wings stiffen and wonder how much meat hides beneath feathers that sleek. The pastor calls a fast day to move God's mercy. He reads from Isaiah about the devouring sword. You notice his belt has a new notch. You kneel on rush mats that smell of mildew and count heartbeats until your knees go numb. When the service ends, parishioners slip behind the screen to argue quietly which fields might bear winter rye, whose ox still lives, whether God hates them precisely or just enough. You keep silent. You know the answer hides inside the last sack of seed. That evening, a puffball of excitement sweeps through the yard. Peddlers from York, bright-voiced despite the mud, selling dried cod, cheaper than Christ's grace. You trade 3 eggs for a slab the colour of bone. Boiled, it smells like rope, but the children tear at flakes with the desperate noise of puppies nursing. You swallow only broth again. Hunger stops feeling like emptiness and starts feeling like copper coins rattling inside a clay jar. Still there, but not for long. By Advent, the parish register records more burials than baptisms. Graves dig quickly in wet earth. The sexton sharpens his spade every other day. You help Alice Withers shroud her youngest in the same sheet she birthed him on. She asks if the earth tastes smoke beneath snow. You don't know how to answer. On the 23rd of December the frost finally hardens. You strike ice from the bucket and watch it shatter into shards so clear they look like pieces of a life you might have had. One with bread crusts, laughter, idle gossip about midsummer fairs. The floorboard beneath you groans as it contracts in the cold. The sound feels personal, like a friend half apologizing for bad news. Good news at last. The sky clears, revealing stars not seen since August. Bad news. Clear skies mean killing cold. You lash sacks across the windows, wedge straw at the door, and coax peat embers to life, coughing at each breath of spiced smoke. Frost feathers creep along the hearthstone anyway, edging closer like parchment ink seeking margins. Near midnight the baby stirs, whimpers. You press a finger to his lips. He sucks, searching for milk your body hasn't made in 3 days. You recite another charm, St. Bridget's this time, but charms need fat and grain, not faith and smoke. And that's before the river ice is solid, sealing the mill wheel and stopping every quernstone in 5 villages, yours first among them. The sun rides high on a late June sky, and even the wood smoke that usually stains the village air has thinned to a pale ribbon more spice than fog. The floorboard by the hearth still delivers its trademark groan when you step over it, but today the sound feels almost playful, like a drum roll before a feast. Good news? It's Midsummer Eve, the one night in the year when work loosens its grip and the whole parish walks out under the same sky to pretend life is lighter than it is. Bad news. The fare costs coin you barely have, your husband is 2 mugs of ale ahead of forgiveness, and sumptuary wardens roam the lanes with fines as sharp as their quills. You start the day at the quern, of course. Some things don't change with the seasons, but you hum while you grind, and the tune catches in your children's throats until the cottage vibrates with half-remembered lyrics about St. John's fires and lovers' jumping flames. The loaf bakes a heartbeat faster than usual. Must be the heat, and the smell of rye crust mingles with the faint tang of wood smoke sneaking down the chimney. You bank the hearth, hush the floorboard with a kicked wedge of straw, and let the bread cool for the journey. By Tierce the lane is already alive. Girls in wreaths of ox-eye daisies sway past, gossips sparkling off them like flies off honey. A peddler creaks by with a barrow of ribbons, loudly absolving every colour from God's wrath scarlet for courage, green for hope, blue for the Virgin. You know the 1261 linen law forbids you anything but undyed wool, yet a sliver of woad blue calls to you like creek water on a drought day. You press 3 eggs into the peddler's palm and tuck the ribbon beneath your headcloth, praying no warden notices. Half a mile out you catch the first whiff of the fare. Smoke again, always the smoke, this time sweet with resin from fresh-cut pine poles that prop the stalls. Under it rolls pig fat, roasted apples, spilled ale, and the iron tang of somebody sharpening knives for the sack race prize. The green beyond the church is striped with booths, dice tables, tarot tents, a relic seller holding up what he swears is John the Baptist's thumbnail, freshly acquired from a monk who owed him rent. You know the routine. Kiss the glass, drop a penny, receive a blessing. You settle for a whispered ave and keep your coin. Across the way, jongleurs strike lutes strung with gut tight as secrets. Their tune hops and swoops, pulling feet into clumsy dance. You yield your youngest to the grandmotherly wife of the reeve, she likes babies, or the bragging rights of holding one and join the ring. Your husband claps time, else sloshing from his beaker. He smiles with all his teeth, a rare event that makes you forget for 12 heartbeats how often those teeth grind shut at home. A twist, a spin, a curtsy too low, and your bodice cord snaps. You catch the flap before decency flees, laughing harder than you have since Candlemas. Mid-video breath. If these candlelit journeys feel as real to you as the floorboard feels to me, drop a quick hail and ale in the comments so I know you're still here under the fair lights with us. It keeps the algorithm turning the spit while we dance. You wander next to the miracle stage where a toothless friar reenacts St. George spearing a dragon that looks suspiciously like 3 pig bladders sewn into a sheet. Children shriek, you snort. The friar pockets 2 pennies and calls it grace. Nearby, a herbalist spreads bundles of dried bark and whispers virtues. Willow for fever, betony for nightmares, tansy for unwanted quickenings. You buy a sprig of tansy, though it costs more than sense insurance tucked into your shift. Late afternoon tilts the sun toward gold. You queue at the ale bench for a wooden mug the size of your fist. Behind you, a loudcloth of a man brags he once saw London. He misquotes statute about fish days and bets anyone within spitting distance a shilling he can down 4 ales without belching. He loses. You step sideways before the proof splatters your shoes. Heat builds, the smoke thickens. Someone lights the St. John's bonfire early and sparks whirl up like captive stars. Good news! The priest forgot last year's sermon about pagan remnants, so nobody stops the dancing. Bad news! Sparks drift into a bundle of straw near the Reeves booth. You and 3 others stomp it out, skirts flaming with courage your mothers would scold. The floorboard in your head creaks, warning you danger never travels alone. Dusk pours indigo over the fair. Musicians shift to slower airs flute. Rebec drum and couples slide away toward the hedgerows. You sit on a keg stump, calves aching, and bite into a meat pie so hot it peels the roof of your mouth. It tastes of mystery, but at least not famine. A storyteller mounts a crate and begins a tale about a knight who wagers his soul for a kiss. You half listen, half count coppers, half hope the children stay sleepy in borrowed arms. Then the warden arrives, ink-black tabard, ledger like a portable judgment seat. He strides past the dice men, past the bone carvers, past the relic seller, and straight to you. That ribbon, he says, is not linen, you swallow. The fine is a penny for every unlawful inch, plus forfeiture. Your husband blinks sober. His hand goes to his belt, purse empty. The warden taps his quill. Around you the fair still sings, but the melody frays. And that's before the first thunderclap cracks overhead, scattering sparks, dancers, and perhaps, if Providence is kind, the warden's attention entirely. Autumn brushes the thatch with gold, but the air feels wrong, too still, too sweet, like fruit left too long in a cellar. Wood smoke coils from chimneys at dusk, yet carries a new undertone, half tallow, half something you can't name. The floorboard beneath the hearth gives its familiar groan when you step on it, as though clearing its throat before bad news. Good news, the harvest is finally in. Bad news, a sickness came with it, riding the same carts that hauled barley and hops down from the coast. It starts with rumours. Fishermen in Dartmouth swear sailors from Gascony are dying where they stand, black bruises blooming in the armpits. The Reeve claims it's French exaggeration, yet he oils his rosary so the beads won't stick to sweaty fingers. 2 days later, a peddler staggers into the village square, coughs a thread of blood onto the cobbles, and collapses against the butter cross. When they lift his tunic, a fist-sized swelling pulses below his jaw, purple as a plum. No one touches him except Father Aldhelm, who mutters the commendation of the dying while holding a sprig of rue to his own nose. By prime the next morning the peddler is dead. They drag him to the bone pit beyond the south wall, no parish grave for travellers, and sprinkle quicklime over the body. You stand with the other wives at a distance to shawl across your mouth. The lime hisses on flesh. A gust carries the sting into your eyes. Smoke from the pyre at the far end of the field drifts across, weaving plague and peat into a single unforgettable smell. The floorboard in your mind creaks again. Don't forget this sound, it says, you may hear it at night. The midwife Ellen braves the manor yard to examine the peddler's pack. Between bolts of Flemish cloth she finds dead fleas, bellies red as garnets twitching in the folds. She burns the cloth regardless of its price. The Lord roars that she has destroyed taxable goods. Ellen spits and says, "Better ashes than agony." A week later, the Lord's own falconer develops the armpit swelling and the roaring stops. Law follows panic. The bailiff nails an ordinance to the church door. No trading with outsiders. No gatherings larger than 10 souls. Fines for families that refuse to seal their sick indoors. Gratian never wrote such statutes, but fear writes faster than canon. You watch the ink drip down the vellum like night water and wonder how a written word can hold back breath. Inside your cottage, life metastasizes into disinfecting. You boil elder leaves in vinegar, hang angelica over the lintel, and stuff pouches of mint and rosemary into the children's shifts. The house reeks like a herb seller's stall layered over the eternal wood smoke. Each inhale feels medicinal, each cough treasonous. Your husband sharpens a knife, not for protection, but for the awful mercy of lancing a bubo should it come. He asks if you could do the same for him. You lie and say yes. The first village bell to toll a plague death is for Alice Withers, the widow whose hands shook during the famine. She's buried at dusk with only 2 witnesses and no mass. Father Aldhelm has quarantined himself in the rectory, hearing confessions through a shutter. The new grave yawns shallow because the gravedigger has 4 more to finish before Lord's. Soil pounds the coffin lid like a drum. Each thud reverberates in your ribs. Smoke from the funeral torches snakes upward, joins the cottage chimneys, paints the sky with stripes of burnt infection. Statistics lurk behind every doorframe. Maternal mortality was once the terror you counted. 1 in 8 women lost to childbirth. Now the ratio mocks you. 1 in 3 villagers infected, half of those dead within 3 days. You recite numbers the way others recite psalms, as if math might broker a truce with fate. The statute of labourers is rumoured in London already wages to be frozen when bodies become scarce. You imagine fewer hands in the barley fields next year and feel the harvest rot in advance. Day 5. The church bell loses its voice. The rope frays from overuse and snaps. No metal clang marks passing souls now, just silence thick as fleece. In that silence the sickness acquires a rhythm. Morning sweats, midday swellings, nighttime blackening. You note each phase like a moon you never wish to track. Ellen comes slipping through back doors, dispensing real cures and whispered hopes. Juniper smoke, she says, cleanses rooms. Wine steeped with wormwood may lower fever. Poppy syrup eases the last hours. She refuses coin, accepts only eggs. The living payment, she jokes without a smile. On her sleeve you spot a dark rose-coloured stain. She meets your eye, shrugs and tugs the fabric down. Not every mark is doom, she says, but her voice cracks on doom. The dovecote falls silent. No coup since yesterday. You climb the ladder to find all 3 birds dead, eyes filmed white. You bury them in the ash pit behind the pigsty and scrub your hands with lye until skin peels. The smell of wood smoke mingles with lye and bile, carving new memory grooves you pray the mind will one day sand smooth. The floorboard at the door moans when you step back inside. You swear the plank is trying to speak warning in a language only nerves understand. Mid-month, carts of corpses rumble from neighbouring parishes toward the limestone pits on the ridge. They pass your lane at dawns when mist smears the world. One morning you notice your eldest staring at the wheels, counting bodies under her breath. You pull her indoors, shove herbs at her nose, and tell her to breathe through the mint, not through fear. She nods, but her eyes keep counting even after the cart is gone. Mid-video check with the unseen Hearthside audience. If you're still walking this plague road with me heart steady, breath measured type still awake in the comments, so I know the smoke hasn't driven you away. Stories survive when listeners do. Back in narrative, day 20. Frost rims the shutter hinges and the fire needs twice the fuel to stay bright. You raid the roof beams for kindling, each splinter another debt added to next spring's repairs. While you hack at a joist, the youngest coughs 1, 2, 3 dry barks. Heat drains from your limbs. You bundle him in blankets that smell of rosemary smoke and press a hand to his neck. Hot, but no swelling, not yet. Good news, maybe it's only chill. Bad news, chill is the plague's favourite disguise. Night swells like a bruise across the thatch. You sit by the hearth, counting floorboard creaks between breaths. 1 creak for Ellen Stain, 1 for the silent doves, 1 for each lime-whitened corpse cart. Your husband dozes upright, knife across his knees. The children sprawl in unnatural angles as if sleep itself has forgotten how to cradle. The smoke churns in the chimney throat, then descends a finger width, testing the room like a priest with incense. And that's when your eldest daughter coughs, a sharp, wet snap, and the floorboard beneath her pallet splits with a crack you have never heard before. Wood smoke hovers in the rafters. You live inside it now, the way a fish lives in water. Yet tonight it seems sharper, as if the hearth itself smells trouble. A single log pops. The floorboard beneath your heel answers with a groan. You flinch. That is all the warning you get. Your husband lurches through the door, half lit by a tallow dip and entirely lit by ale. His boots track mud across a rush floor you just swept. His cloak reeks of cheap cider and bragging rights earned at the tavern. He slams the latch, turns, and stares as though you're the stranger here. Behind him the wind whistles through a crack in the thatch. But you know better. That whistle is St. Cuthbert turning his face. "Stew cold," he says. 2 words, thick with promise. You lift the pot from the hook, hand steady, but the grease is congealed and the beans have sunk to a stiff island. You were waiting for him, fire kept low to save wood, and now the meal looks like penance. You begin to ladle anyway, each scoop a prayer that he'll merely grumble. Bad news first. Leges Henrici Primi, the king's century-old code, says a husband may beat his wife moderately, for correction bruises below the belt, welts thin as a rod, no bone cracked, no blood spilled upon the Lord's floor. Good news? That same code imposes a fine if he kills you outright. You've memorized the tariff. 8 shillings for a maid, 12 for a wife of freeman status. Your life, priced like barley. He tastes the first spoonful and winces. Then the fist comes quick, drunk, practiced. You don't see it. You feel it. An iron band around air itself. Your cheek blooms hot, ear ringing like chapel bells. The floorboard creaks in protest. The hearth spits a spark. Somewhere outside a dog barks once and wisely stops. "Cold," he mutters again, rubbing knuckles as if you'd wronged them. You set the pot back, stir with shaking fingers, and then risk a whisper. It needed saving for tomorrow. The moment the words leave, you regret them. Wives may plead, never explain. He grabs your wrist, the bone shift under his thumb, a greater pinch enough to mark but not break, and you remember the church court's guidance written in parchment and pious ink. A husband may chastise so long as he avoids excessive cruelty. No one defines excessive. You suspect it means whatever doesn't wake the reeve. He lets go and tips the rest of the pot down his throat. Broth dribbles into his beard. He wipes it with the back of his hand, smears the mess onto your sleeve, and drops onto the bench. Within breaths he snores, mouth open like a stable door. You stand motionless, cheek throbbing, wrist burning, listening to the creak that lives inside the floorboard an old friend now counting the beats until you're sure he's under. You move then, quiet as a cat, to gather nettle salve from the shelf. Ellen the midwife brewed it for childbirth bruises, but bruises are bruises. You dab a finger of green paste onto your skin, it stings, then cools. You flex your wrist until the pain recedes to a memory. Pain is memory in this house. The fire gutters low. You kneel to bank it for night, but he stirs, mutters, kicks the bench leg. Reflex snaps your shoulders in. Fear and wood smoke smell alike in the dark. You breathe both. When his breathing deepens again, you crawl to the door, lift the heavy bar, and peer outside. The lane lies silent under a sliver moon. A rooster confused by lantern glow crows once, then hides. Across the yard, neighbour Joan's window shows candlelight flickering wild. You know what that means. You've heard it before. Joan's husband returned from alehouse earlier than yours. The village speaks next day in half voice about marital correction, but the bruises bloom full voice on Joan's skin. You ease the bar back and slip inside. The latch clicks. He doesn't wake. You exhale. Mid-video breath for the listeners still on this night road with me. If the truth of these old walls feels heavier than the armour of any knight, tap still awake in the comments so I know you haven't turned away. Shadows are easier to bear when someone else agrees they're real. You gather the children, one asleep on straw, one nursing a cough by the hearth, and settle them in the corner farthest from his boots. You tuck the smallest under the patchwork blanket stitched from your own torn kirtles. His snores rumble, sparks drift, the floor croons its tired complaint. You think of Agnes Le Folie, tried in manorial court in 1307 for biting her husband above his station. The fine was 6 deniers. Her teeth left scars that cost more. You wonder if Agnes considered it worth the coin? Your aunt once told you of an Oxford widow who filed a plea for annulment, citing fear for body and soul. She sold her dowry goats to pay the bishop's clerk. After 3 years of hearings, Rome denied her. No witness, no miracle, no release. The goats were never refunded. You revisit that story on nights like this, turning it over like a stone in your pocket proof that courts can read bruises and still see parchment. A log collapses. You flinch again, hand flying to cheek. He grunts, shifts, mutters your name or some version of it, then drifts back under. You kneel to pick up splintered embers, tuck them safely, mindful of the leg is once more. If the house burns from your negligence, you owe compensation in silver or service. Law presses on you from every angle. If you stoke the fire too high, you risk flames. Too low, you risk his wrath. Moderation, they say, but moderate warmth won't cook tomorrow's bread. You have considered running. Where? Distance equal to a pilgrimage and twice as dangerous. The Statute of Winchester lets sheriffs arrest vagabond women on sight. If they catch you without a master's letter, you'll be whipped through the market and sent back home, escorted by the same reeve who counts your hens. Besides, winter tracks footprints to the mile. A woman on the road alone is news before she crosses the next parish. So you stay, and law stays with you. A parchment cage invisible but thick as oak. He snorts awake, eyes half open. All. The word slurs. You hurry to pour, wiping rim with cloth, praying the dregs dull him faster. He drains the cup, lets it fall and reaches. His hand catches yours again, gentler this time, thumb tracing the very bruise he birthed. Good wife, he says, voice gooey. Your stomach knots as tightly as the cord on a hay bale. He squeezes, not in anger now in possession. Worse somehow. Then he releases, slumps, snores anew. You retreat to the threshold, press your back to cool stone. The floorboards sighs a warning you already know. Dawn is hours away. You count chores left grind rye, mend his hose, draw water before frost seals the bucket rope. Each task stacks like firewood, needed, heavy, unavoidable. Outside, a sudden snapwood splintering, a muffled cry. Joan's candle vanishes, a door slams. Silence spreads across the lane like spilled milk. You swallow hard. Your neighbour's bones just told the night a secret, and the night swallowed it whole. And that's before the sheriff's boots splash into the yard hunting runaway hens and wives alike. The fire has settled into its late afternoon murmur, clinking now and then like crockery as small knots collapse. For the first time today you are alone, husband off mending fences, children foraging for hazelnuts, and those few square yards between wall, hearth, and door briefly belong to you. Good news, the cottage is small enough to warm with half a cart of firewood a week. Bad news, it is small enough that every breath of yours perfumes the rafters for hours. Today the perfume is barley broth, wet wool, and a hint of tallow smoke that will cling to tomorrow's shift no matter how long you air it. You start, as you always do when the house is quiet, with the ledger only you can read. Not parchment costs coin you do not yet dare spend, but a strip of birch bark scored with symbols, for 1 farthing, for a halfpenny, for a hole. 8 months ago you began recording every egg, every sprig of thyme, every hen's feather that leaves your keeping. The scribe at the manor court would laugh at your cipher, yet the marks steady your heart the way a psalter steadies a priest. Under the bed, really a wattle frame stuffed with straw and bribed into silence with scraps of felt lies, the length of Norwich cloth you've been nursing for 2 years. 1L, 45 inches from La Selvage to cut edge. Exactly enough to make a kirtle for your eldest when she grows into womanhood, or, if winter comes harsh, enough to barter for 3 stones of rye. You run the cloth between finger and thumb, feeling the nap raise faintly. Wool remembers handling and rewards it with softness. 1L is not much to the bishop's tailor, but to you it feels like a vote in council, a word spoken without permission, a sliver of sovereignty. Beside it sits the clay pot with your egg money 12 silver pennies and 2 clipped farthings, all gleaned 1 market day at a time. You upend the jar and count by touch rather than by sight, skills sharpened in childhood games of blind man's buff. 12 and 2, correct. With 14 you could petition the reeve to lease you a quarter strip of barley next planting. With 20 you might buy a nanny goat and never fear a dry breast again. You fold the coins into a knot of linen and slip them into a hollow beneath the hearthstone, a niche you dug one midnight when everyone else slept. The floorboard your ever-faithful gossip groans as you straighten, but not loudly enough to betray you. You step outside to feed the hens, basket under arm. Prickles of damp breeze carry autumn's promise. The geese by the pond have begun their throat-clearing for the long flight south. Inside the coop, Eleanor, named for a queen you once glimpsed in an illuminated Bible, flutters indignantly as you slide warm eggs from straw. 4 today lavish fortune. 1 you will poach for the baby, 2 will travel to market tomorrow, and the smallest, no bigger than a sparrow's dream, you tuck inside your bodice. It will become pigment, yolk tempered with madder to patch the St. Margaret icon whose red robe has faded to shame pink. Even paint, you decide, should not remind a martyr of nakedness. Back indoors the smoke has thickened. You crack the shutter a finger's breadth to coax a draught without inviting full wind. The plank behind you whispers a dry little pop like a secret dare. You pause, listen, nothing but the hearth's sigh. Still, habit bends you to lift the loose board and check the second hiding place, the one meant for things more dangerous than silver, a folded scrap of vellum. On it a passing peddler scribe wrote 4 lines in Latin. Thomas Filius Rogeri owes 7 pence for dowry service. Your husband's name, but your debt, one the steward claims, is still outstanding despite the fact it was paid before your eldest's baptism. The vellum is your shield if the steward tries to seize a hen or worse, your daughter's dowry cow in some future winter of excuses. You read the Latin aloud, rolling the words until they sound like a blessing, then tuck the sheet back beneath the board. The gap clicks shut. Evening bleeds in through the shutter gap, staining the hearth orange. Time to make pottage, carrots, onions, Lord's salt, a bone boiled so often you know its every crack like a road map. You drop in crushed mustard seed luxury bought 3 weeks ago with a single egg. The seeds pop, releasing a sharp scent that shoulders aside the smoke for a precious minute. You breathe deeply. A queen could not savour saffron more than you savour that fleeting taste of mustard. Your eldest returns first, apron bulging with nuts and a guilty smile. You tap her wrist. Neither scolding nor praising, just reminding her to leave half the hall for Sunday's tithe. She rolls her eyes, 13 and already weary of God's accountants. You tilt her chin, teach her again the old trick. Close one eye, align the moon's horns with the horizon. If a horn points to tomorrow's sunrise, rain will follow within a day. She repeats the gesture, trying to look bored, but the corner of her mouth curls. Knowledge tastes sweet, even when disguised as chore. Your youngest traipses in with a single apple stolen from the Lord's boundary tree, evidence bright as blood. Panic pricks you, fines for gleaning are stiff, and the reeve's eyes are everywhere near harvest. You crush the fruit into the pottage so quickly it seems to vanish, then scrub the child's hands with a rag soaked in ash water. Theft erased, or at least rendered less noticeable than freckles. The door thuds open, your husband appears, smelling of wet turf and wounded pride. He tosses you a rabbit half-grown snare caught still warm. Tomorrow's stew, he announces as though bestowing a relic. You nod, grateful, and slip the carcass onto a hook by the lintel. When his back turns, you shave a ribbon of its fat to rub into the cracks of your 1L cloth. Fat keeps moths at bay better than any priestly prayer. Now comes the evening barter with silence. Husband dozing, children whispering, you stitch by firelight. A simple running seam on a linen cuff, but each stitch tight enough to hold the world together. Thread runs short. You lick the frayed end, twist, push through the eye. The needle flashes like a shard of moon. In out, rhythm so steady you could measure mercy by it. Outside, the horn of the night watch blares, a once signal of the bailiff making rounds for taxes in arrears. Your pulse knocks hard against your ribs. A draught slithers down the chimney. The smoke droops, curls sideways like a question mark. The plank answers with a groan louder than before, as if betrayed. Footsteps crunch in the yard, heavy, purposeful, approaching your door. You rise, swift as a cat, kick the loose board free, snatch the linen knot of coins, the vellum, the ell of wool still glistening with rabbit grease. You shove them deep into the ember's ash at the hearth's cool edge, bury them beneath grey powder that looks like nothing except yesterday's fire. A fist hammers wood. Your eldest yelps, clutching the hem of your skirt. You draw a breath thick with smoke and open the latch. Night settles like damp wool over the cottage, and the last grey sliver of daylight squeezes itself shut behind the hills. You bank the hearth with yesterday's peat, stirring a cough of wood smoke that crawls across the rafters and finds its old seat in your lungs. Good news! The fire still admits enough heat to keep frost from the rushes. Bad news! Its glow also tells every passer-by that somebody's home, somebody worth robbing, begging, or conscripting. The day's chores ended hours ago, but the night demands its own ledger. You ladle the dregs of barley stew more water than grain into 4 wooden bowls. The children gather like wary sparrows and gulp without speech. One son's legs curve inward, softened by rickets. A daughter scratches pox scars that light the candlelit skin of her arms like constellations. You portion yourself the broth left in the pot, lift it, then set it back. Better they sleep heavy than you. Outside the shutter the wind yanks at the thatch, testing the wattle like a thief fingering a latch. A wolf answers from the wood, 3 notes that rise and fall like a church bell heard in reverse. You whisper St. Hubert's name and jam the oaken bar tight across the door. The floorboard by the threshold creaks, half greeting, half warning. You press a palm to it, steady, friend. Not tonight. With the children drowsing, you fetch the penny-royal pouch from the chimney niche. The midwife swore a pinch in ale once a moon keeps another mouth from crying for milk that isn't there. The priest calls it a mortal sin, a murder you drink. You roll the pouch between finger and thumb. Dry leaves crackle like distant fire. Good news, the choice is yours. Bad news, the choice is yours. You pour water into the chipped beaker, hesitate, pour it back. Smoke stings your eyes until tears blur the room. You slip the pouch into the coffer instead, between the rabbit-greased ell of Norwich cloth and the silver penny that might yet buy a shoemaker's mercy. Some day perhaps you'll dare swallow the future. Tonight you settle for surviving the present. The dog wakes first, ears pricked, hackles a ridge of needled fur. You hold your breath. Footsteps? No. Hooves. Slow, deliberate metal on stone at the edge of the lane. Soldiers on chevauchée. foraging in the king's name. You snuff the candle and gather the children by feel, herding them behind the loom. In darkness the cottage smells of peat tar, sour milk, and sweat trapped in wool, the perfume of fear. Voices outside, muffled by mist. One laughs about ale, another curses the mud. A third says something about smoke, he can smell it. Your heart thumps so hard you fear the floorboard will echo it. Then a clatter. The soldiers steer on. Maybe they found a fuller light farther down the green. Maybe they'll circle back. Silence seeps in, thick as pitch. You count to 100, then strike a flint. A blue spark, a stubby flame. Shadows return to their corners like scolded children. The youngest whimpers. You press him against your breastbone where a heartbeat pretends to be a lullaby. Sleep, you hiss, though you cannot. Time stretches, elastic and cruel. You mend by firelight his hose, her cuff, the future needle dipping through cloth like a shuttle. Each stitch pulls smoke deeper into your hair. The girls dream in fits. One mutters about bread, the other about ghosts in hedges. Your son wets himself. You hush him, change straw, promise tomorrow will smell better. At midnight hunger triggers memory. You have a heel of rye hidden in the rafters for sickness days. You stand on the stool, fingertips searching the beam. The loaf is there, but so too a hole gnawed clean by rats. You bite down a curse, climb down, and wonder how many morsels you'll lose before spring. The hearth dips. Embers redden to coals the size of coins, silver, then copper, then none. You feed it the last splinter of birch, watch flame lick up the smoke column like a snake returning to its burrow. Outside, the wolf chorus resumes. Closer now, harmonizing with something heavier. A drumbeat? No. Hooves again. Faster. Many. You steal to the shutter and lift the edge a finger width. Down the ridge torches bob, a string of fiery beads threading through fog. Not the 3 soldiers from before, a dozen at least, maybe more, helmets flashing ember red. A chevauché? A levy? A raiding band who lost their lord and found their thirst? You count torches. 8, 11, 14. The floorboard groans beneath your bare heel, louder than thunder in the hush. You close the shutter, slide the bolt, push the table against it. Children rouse, eyes wide and white. You speak without breath. Into the loft now. They climb the ladder like cats chased by fire. You hand up the dog, he whines but obeys. Then you douse the hearth with the water meant for tomorrow, swallowing a cry as the last warmth of the world hisses into darkness. Good news? Wet peat masks, fresh smoke. Bad news? A dark house doesn't always look empty. You crouch beneath the loom, clutching the pennyroyal pouch because it weighs less than hope and more than prayer. Outside, hooves halt. A man shouts, "Light there, saw it a moment past." Another voice. Maybe only a cotter's oven. Move on. The first insists. Oven means pottage, means ale. Laughter. Footsteps crunch. Your throat closes like a fist. The floorboard answers each step with its betrayal. Creak, creak, as if the soldiers already stand inside. But the sound is yours, your ribs straining. You bite your wrist until iron floods your mouth, willing even the wood to stillness. Minutes or years pass. Hooves roll on, fading like thunder over distant hills. A torch glow sweeps the shutter, slats once, twice, then drains down the lane. Night reclaims its throne. You stay folded beneath the loom until legs tingle into numbness. When you rise, the roof beams whisper with faint emberlight. The soldiers have found another cottage. A scream lifts, cuts off. You press palm to mouth of each child in turn, though they make no sound. One by one you lower them, settle them on straw turned cold. Dawn is hours away, but the sky outside the shutter pulses orange now. Someone's barn, someone's life. The floorboard creaks beneath you. Softer this time, more question than warning. You answer it with a whisper. Not yet. And that's before the nearest torchlight tilts toward your door, painting the threshold blood red. The bell for prime rings low and distant, but you sleep past it. Because last night a messenger arrived with news that rearranged the furniture of your life. Smallpox has taken your husband on the road between York and Beverley. The reeve read the letter aloud beneath a sputtering torch while your children huddled behind the loom. One sentence, pray for his soul, he died confessed. And the house shifted on its timbers, as though the very joints didn't know whose name to obey any longer. Good news! Widowhood in 1292 grants you legal standing no married woman ever tastes. You may own property, sue for debts, and refuse every suitor who thinks a field and two girls make a bargain. Bad news! The same parish that just lifted your veil of obedience will test every boundary of your new freedom, beginning with your husband's kin, already saddling their horses at dawn. You fold back the blanket, rise carefully. The floorboard emits its habitual groan, curious rather than scolding. Smoke from the hearth is thin this morning, half-hearted as if it too wonders whose bread it will season. You bank the coals anyway. Children still need porridge whether or not there is a man to bless the bowl. First task, inventory. Your dower portion under common law is 1/3 of all lands he held in domain. The priest explained at once. You are entitled to reasonable Estophas wood, pasture, fishing rights, so you can keep the household alive. Reasonable, however, is measured by men who lost nothing last night. You count sacks of rye, hens, the least of the North Strip, and the pewter mug with a dragon handle your husband one arm wrestling a fuller. Every item suddenly gleams with the precarious shine of collateral. Second task, public grief. You wrap a length of undyed wool around your shoulders. Widow's weeds aren't required by statute, but propriety is its own gallows. Outside, dawn mist hugs the village green. The church bell tolls again, this time for the dead. You cross yourself and notice how many eyes linger a moment too long. A widow is half revered, half auditioned. At the manor gate your brother-in-law Thomas awaits, cloak-lined with rabbit fur despite the mild air. He speaks gently but stands between you and the steward's hall. "Sister," he begins, "for your safety we'll hold the charters until you're settled." You answer softly that the charters are already safe beneath your hearthstone, wrapped in eel skin, but you'd sooner chew nettles than share that fact. Instead you invoke the law of dower. Thomas frowns, twirls his gloves, speaks of household burdens, male guardianship, the hazards of single women. Each argument scratches like straw. You reply with one word, custom, and watch it land like a pebble in a bowl. He steps aside. Smoke from the hall drifts over the threshold and swirls behind him, as though reluctant to choose sides. Inside, the manor court reads the death writ. The steward, quill poised, lists your late husband's movables and chattels: 2 oxen, a black mare, a pair of iron shears, 5 fields in open strip, and the ale bench let to the taverner. He turns to you for assent. Your voice barely clears your lips, so noted, but the jurors, all male, nod approval. The widow spoke, therefore the list is true. A curious thrill rises in your chest. You have spoken in court and were not silenced. Power tastes like iron, sharp and bright. By afternoon the village changes its face. The miller greets you with an extra nod, offers to grind rye on credit. The reeve inspects your firewood pile and suggests you might winter better if you sold half your hens and bought coal. He knows a merchant. The baker's wife delivers condolences wrapped around a proposal. Her second cousin is a stonemason in need of companionship. Each kindness jingles like coin on a table. You smile, thank them, store the offers behind your eyes. Walking home, you rehearse the numbers. 1/3 of the arable means 7 strips out of 21, but which 7? If Thomas claims the fertile loam by the river, you'll be left with clay that cracks in drought. English law allows you to choose after assignment, yet disputes drag on. You recall Isabel of Ely in the plea rolls of 1349 widow who bribed the coroner with 2 hens and a salter to certify her late husband died naturally, securing her property before cousins could claim it. She kept her land, but fed the coroner until the plague took him. Freedom, you note, is maintained with payments as regularly as rent. Back at the cottage, smoke curls more confidently. The older girl has kept the fire alive. You kiss her cheek, taste salt from silent tears she wiped before you entered. "Mother, are we safe?" she whispers. You recount the law carefully, yes, you have rights. She nods, but fear lingers like ash on skin. You resolve to teach her letters this winter. A woman who can read her own charters doesn't need a priest's memory. Nightfall. Parish women arrive bearing bread, leeks, a small flask of brandy wine. They recite Psalm 90 while you lay your husband's cloak across the bench. His body will return in 2 days, carried by the wool guild. Custom says you must host a vigil the night before burial, provide ale, cheese, a story of his virtues. You practice the story in your head. His kindness to animals, his laugh in haying season, the way he once patched the roof during sleet. The tale omits how he struck you over burnt oats. Widowhood allows selective memory. After they leave, you slide the hearthstone aside. Beneath lies the eelskin pouch. Charters, the sealed quit-claim from Sir Geoffrey for that disputed meadow, and 7 silver pennies your secret hoard. You finger the wax seals, they feel warmer than the fire. You add one more item, the small pennyroyal sachet you never dared drink. A widow can choose when and if to bear another child. For now, the power to decide is worth more than the herbs themselves. You reseat the stone. The floorboard gives a satisfied creak as if approving the deposit. Smoke thickens, blends with candle tallow, wraps the room in a hush. Good news? The law now calls you femme sole, capable of suing and being sued, of trading without a guardian, of keeping your own wage if ever you earn one. Bad news. Every suitor, sheriff, and distant cousin will measure that freedom in cows, acres, and the softness of your voice. Too hard, they'll label you shrew. Too soft, they'll count your hens before you do. At cockcrow 2 days later, the guild arrives with the body wrapped in linen, face already waxen. You set the vigil table, bread, salt, small beer. Villagers file in, cross themselves, whisper comforts. Thomas appears last, doffs his hood, places 3 beeswax candles by the beer expensive, fragrant, illuminating wrinkles in the cloak he once coveted. During prayers he leans close. Sister, perhaps you and the children should winter at our manor for safety. You meet his gaze, steady as embers. The hearth here is warm enough, you reply. He studies you, smiles thinly, murmurs, for now, and turns away. The candles flicker, their smoke rises straight and unwavering. Burial morning. Frost rims the meadow. The bier lurches toward the churchyard. You walk behind, children in tow, your veil damp with breath. At the grave edge the priest intones Cinera Cineri, ashes to ashes, and you toss a clod of earth that breaks against the shroud like a soft knock on a locked door. With that sound the legal clocks begin. 40 days to claim your dower before Eshit threatens. You count each day already, like beads sliding on a cord. That night you seal the cottage shutter against wind. The room smells of onions, wool, and the lingering sweetness of beeswax. You spread parchment on the table, dip quill into soot ink and draft a list for Manor Court. I, Marjorie, widow of William, claim by right of dower the following parcels. Your hand shakes, but each letter darkens the page with possession. Midnight. The floorboard croons, the hearth spits a spark that dies short of the rushes. You feel the world balance, terror in one pan, liberty in the other. Somewhere outside hooves crunch the reeve making rounds, a suitor arriving early, wind. You grip the eelskin pouch and breathe smoke that tastes of wet earth and beginnings. And that's before a stranger's fist raps the door 3 times, offering condolences or a contract. The first hard frost steals the village into silence. No birdsong, no flowing water, only the faint crackle of ice as puddles stiffen under a clouded moon. You wake before prime, wrapped in 3 wool layers that trap more smoke than warmth, and for a moment you wonder whether the sky itself has frozen in place. Good news, the year's grain rent is paid barely, and the reeve's tally shows none of your hens missing. Bad news? Edward Avant's new tallage is due by Candlemas, and widows rank just after clergy on the sheriff's collection list. A breath fogs in front of your lips. The hearth glows sullen red. Peat embers mutter that they too are tired. You rake them forward, feed them a twist of birch. The flame flares blue, then orange. Smoke unspools against the rafters like a warning banner. Above, that singular floorboard answers with its long arthritic groan, a sound you now hear as a question. What will this winter cost? You move quickly. The youngest is already coughing, nothing wet, thank the saints, but the dry hollow bark that foretells croup. You ladle a spoon of the honey you traded for last Michaelmas into chicory infusion, kiss his temple, feel heat rising like steam off a kettle. St. Blease, patron of throats, accept this plea, you whisper, though you know his chapel takes pennies you can't spare. Time to face the outdoors. A gust barges through the door before you finish unlatching it, stabbing every inch of exposed skin. The world is white, not from snow, but hoarfrost thick as linen nap, coating branches, buckets, even the manure pile. Your boots crunch. Each step sounds like pottery shattering. Water first. The well rope has frozen to the winch. You pour half a kettle of hot peat water over the knot until it loosens, muttering that your dowry never mentioned ice management. When the bucket finally splashes, the well breathes a mist straight back into your face, an exhalation colder than the inhalation. Back inside, the quern awaits. You grind yesterday's barley with numb wrists until flour dust ghosts the air. The handle squeals, the grain smells faintly of mouse. Crop tithes left you only the discoloured kernels pinked by ergot, but you sift obsessively to keep the poison bits out. Too much ergot and the whole house dances the St. Vitus jig. You've seen it happen to the miller's brood 2 winters ago, limbs jerking like marionettes until the priest called it demonic and buried them anyway. You hum a psalm to cover the memory. The dough rises poorly in the chill. You set it closer to the fire, then check the hidden niche beneath the hearthstone. 12 pennies, 2 clipped farthings, and the eel-skin pouch of deeds still rest where you left them. You run your thumb across the wax seal of the quitclaim, your only proof that the river strip is yours by dower right, should Thomas attempt a second grab. The wax is warm from the fire's belly. You choose to take that as a blessing. Mid-morning brings the bailiff's knock 3 deliberate blows, as though he bills by the thud. You open the door half a span, enough to smell his breath, ale and onions, and see the parchment in his glove. Tallage assessment, he announces. 3 shillings, 8 pence due on the feast of the purification. 3 and 8. You swallow. That's half a cow or a third of next year's seed. I'll pay at Candlemas, you manage. He eyes the empty corner where last year's spinning wheel stood, now sold, and notes, absence like a wolf noting limping prey. Candlemas, he repeats, folds the parchment and is gone, muddy boot prints melting on your threshold. You close the door, lean forehead to wood until splinters threaten flesh. The floorboard groans behind you, as if it too heard the sum. Good news, you have 6 weeks. Bad news, you must conjure coins from a winter earth that gives nothing back until Easter. Solutions flicker like sparks. Spinning? No fleece left. Brewing? Malt's too dear. Rent out the spare pallet to a journeyman? Risk single men bring trouble. You think of the 1 ell of Norwich wool tucked in the loft, rabbit fat rubbed into its weave against moths. Sell it, and your eldest coming-of-age kirtle dissolves into someone else's purse. Keep it, and the bailiff takes a hen or worse, the quern. The room tilts. You steady against the table. Wood smoke stings your nose, reminding you to breathe. Near sex the church bell rings, but dull, more thunk than clang. Ice muffles the metal. You herd children into cloaks for mass. Inside the nave, breath from 50 bodies steams upward, frosting the painted saints. Father Aldhelm preaches on Job, the Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Easy words from lips paid by tithes. Yet you kneel, because rebellion earns only fire or rope. During the offertory you slip a single hazelnut into the poor box's smallest arms you can manage without public shame. The nut clicks in the wooden slot like a pebble dropped into a pit. Outside, snow begins, not flakes but needles, stinging as they fall. You hurry home, children huddled beneath your arms like chicks under a broody hen. The cottage greets you with a sullen sigh of smoke. The kernstone squeals in the wind as though alive. Afternoon, you tackle the hedge. Winter storm snapped 2 withy panels. You patch them with willow rods John Miller sent after your fine months ago. Hands bleed where bark splits, but the woven lattice tightens, sealing out wolves and you hope the bailiff's covetous gaze. Ice beads on the rods, turning them glassy. By the time you finish, dusk smudges the sky. Your fingers ache so deeply you fear they'll never unclench. Inside again, You brew nettle and leek pottage, a broth thin enough to read psalms through. You float a marrow bone in the pot. It gives more hope than flavour. The children slurp. You count bites, ensuring each gets equal misery. You claim none, saying mothers eat later. They don't yet know later often means never. Night clots quickly in winter. You bank the fire high. Peat splutters, spraying sparks that die before hitting wool. You lay the youngest near the hearth, stroke his damp brow. His cough eases under the warm draught. Perhaps scent blaze heard after all. You tuck the ell of wool under your own pallet to remind yourself choices remain. Then comes the sound you dread. Hoofbeats in the lane, slow and certain. Not drunken staggering, but official rhythm. You douse the lantern. The cottage plunges into smoky twilight. The floorboard issues its loudest groan yet protest or betrayal, you can't decide. A man's silhouette blocks the shutter gap, breath plumes white in the slit. A gauntlet raps once on wood. You clutch the penny stash through your apron, pulse hammering like a smith at forge. Silence. Another rap, softer, almost polite. "Good wife?" a voice calls. Thomas, brother-in-law turned would-be guardian. "I have news from York Important." News costs, you think. You glance at the children, all eyes round as candle flames. Smoke pools at the ceiling, thick enough to choke prophecy itself. And that's before the latch lifts of its own accord, admitting both cold air and whatever reckoning this winter has left to spend. The coals have sunk to a hush of red, and the last filament of smoke threads upward, curls once, and vanishes into black rafters. The floorboard you've heard all night gives a final sleepy groan as if it too is ready to rest. You've walked one lifetime in her shoes marriage contracts bartered over ale. Infants weighed against harvests, hedges mended with bleeding hands, hearthstones hiding more than embers. If you're still standing, even in imagination, that alone is a kind of victory. Take a breath. Feel how different the air is now that you know what lingers in it. Not romance, not chivalry wood smoke, peat tar, linen steam, the metallic tang of worry. History once painted medieval women in soft light. Ladies in towers, damsels at looms. Tonight showed you the ledger they actually balanced, one entry for dowry, one for bruises, one for a single ell of cloth tucked under loose floorboards, because hope needs hiding places. Every tick of the church bell, every creak of timber told her the same thing. Keep moving or be moved. Yet inside that brutal arithmetic lived everyday genius. She brewed ale that kept a village's water drinkable, read the moon to time the planting, mixed nettle and honey when nothing else could soothe a cough. She negotiated with reeves, midwives, priests, cousins who circled like crows, and somehow still left a crust of bread for the beggar at the door. The chroniclers forgot her name, the parish rolls noted only her fines. But the cottage still stands because she kept the mortar wet and the children warm. 7 centuries later, you can hear the echo of her wooden clogs on the threshold if you listen past the tourist bells. If these quiet journeys pull you closer to the people history writes in small print, a quick like or subscribe keeps the hearth lit on this channel. And because I love watching our midnight caravan stretch across time zones, drop a comment with one moment that struck you hardest. Was it the quernstone shrieking before dawn, or the penny royal pouch you had to decide not to drink? Write just one word, survive. If that's all the energy you have left, I'll recognize the courage in it. Soon, a modern sunrise will seep around your curtains, carrying the scent of coffee instead of damp wool. Before it does, remember one last thing. The world we inherit rests on beams she hoisted when no one was watching. Every house that doesn't leak, every law that notices bruises, every birth where death isn't invited, all of it traces back to women who bargained with the dark and sometimes, miraculously, won. So when your own day starts too early and asks too much, think of her inhaling smoke that doubled as wallpaper. Think of the floorboard warning her to step lightly. Think of how she whispered stories into the rafters so her children would dream of more than survival. Then step forward. The fire is banked. The cottage door is barred. Outside, wolves and sheriffs are both a little farther off than they were at dusk. Inside, the silence she earned is yours for the keeping. Let it settle over your shoulders like a cloak. Listen. The plank under the hearth offers one faint creak, almost a lullaby. That's history closing its eyes, but only until the next time we lift the latch and let the wood smoke breathe again. Sleep light, dawn always comes early for a medieval wife.